Hey there, Method students. In this video, we are starting Chapter 17, and Chapter 17 is all about sampling and estimation. So it's essentially about how you might have like a really big population, a really big group of people or things that you want to find out some information about. But to save a bit of time, you actually take a smaller sample from that group, and you hope that that's going to give you some information about the bigger population. So there's a few sort of phrases and definitions to get our heads around. Firstly, when we talk about a population, well, that's a group of people that you want to know something about. So for example, that might be all students at Ringwood Secondary College. That might be the population, every single student. The symbol that we use for the population size is often this capital N. And in some practical cases, you might be dealing with a situation where the value of N is actually unknown because you don't know how big a population is potentially. A sample is a smaller group within the population that's used to collect information from. So for example, if we think of Ringwood Secondary College as our full population, well, if we chose a small group of 20 students from Ringwood Secondary College, that would be a sample. And the symbol that we often use for the sample size is a lowercase n. Okay, so capitals matters there, right? Capital N for population, lowercase n for sample. So in this example, senior school coordinators are interested in knowing how many hours of study each of the 225 Year 12 students complete per night. Maybe they don't have time to ask all 225 students, so they interview 40 students at random, and we have to determine the population size and the sample size. So in this example, big N is the population. There are 225 Year 12 students in total, and little n is the sample size, and in this example, we took a sample of 40 students. Okay, moving on to a couple more definitions. So parameters and statistics. So a parameter, which we often use a lowercase p to represent, is a characteristic of a population. So this lowercase p is known as the population proportion. So it essentially means there might be some characteristic within your population, maybe the proportion of people who have brown hair in a population, right? So p is known as the population proportion. A statistic, which we use this symbol, and it sounds funny, we actually call it p hat because it looks like a P with a hat drawn on the top of it. It's not a joke, that's actually what we call it, is a characteristic of a sample. So p hat is known as the sample proportion. So if you take a sample of people and find that, I don't know, 20% of them have blonde hair, well then p hat would equal 20%. Okay, so in this example, we're going to state whether each of the following are population parameters, which is P, or sample statistics, which would be P hat. So 38% of voters at the recent federal election voted for Liberal. Well, that's all the voters at the election, so that would be a population parameter. So just to shorten it, I'm going to write P. A group of 30 students were surveyed, and it was found that 25% did not get 8 hours of sleep regularly. So a group of 30 students surveyed, that makes it sound like that's a sample, right? You haven't interviewed all the students at a school, we've just interviewed a small group. That's a sample proportion. So P hat. And in fact, the question didn't ask for it, but in 2A, we would say that it's P, and P equals 0.38. In 2B, it's a statistic, p hat, and it equals 0.25. So I'm going to write down the numbers even though the question didn't ask us to do that. 2C, according to the recent census, 56% of Australians aged over 40 have at least one child. Well, a census, it's actually been one of them conducted quite recently. A census is where you get information from the whole population. So that's a population proportion. So that would be P equals 0.56. And a recent poll suggests, well, actually, before you even read any further, a poll is like a survey, which is like, it's a sample. So a poll means that we're talking about a sample proportion. So P hat equals, and if we read the rest of it, a recent poll suggests nearly a third of Melbourne's voters are in favour of the East-West link being built. So, well, nearly a third means maybe I should write P hat is approximately equal to 1/3, sorry. Okay, so yeah, a mixture of population proportions and sample proportions in those examples there. It really just depends on the context of the question and whether the information is coming from a sample, a smaller group, or whether the information is coming from the entire population. All right, this next little section, look, to be honest, you probably won't have to do heaps of this, but it's good to understand it anyway. Selecting samples. So there's a few different methods that statisticians will use when they're actually choosing a sample. Sometimes you try to do it just completely at random. So where everybody's got kind of an equal chance of being chosen, everybody in the population has an equal chance of being chosen. You might do a systematic sample where you might be able to somehow like line up all the population in order and then choose every 5th person or every 20th person or every 5th thing. That doesn't always have to be people. A stratified random sample, this is where you might have like subgroups in your population. Maybe you're looking at a school where you've got like junior school, middle school, and senior school students, and you want to make sure you get an equal number from each part or a proportionate value from each part of that sort of population. That's a stratified random sample. A self-selected sample is where you just choose the people you want to talk to, and that obviously can lead to some biases as well. So usually when you're taking a sample, you're trying to take out any biases so that the sample is like a fair, accurate representation of the population. Okay, so example 3. In year 8, there are 100 boys and 150 girls. If a stratified sample of 40 students is to be taken, how many boys and girls should be included in the sample? So essentially what we're saying is like we've got this population of 250 and this proportion of boys and girls. We want to kind of keep that proportion the same in our sample of 40 students. So what we might do is say like proportion of girls. Well, that in the population, that's 150 over the total, which is 250, which is 3/5 or 0.6. So in other words, 60% of the population in this example are girls. So we want to make sure that 60% of the sample are girls as well. So the proportion in the sample, not the proportion in the sample, that's still 0.6. I shouldn't use that word. Let's say number in sample. Number of girls in sample. That's not how you spell girls. Will equal, well, we want it to be 0.6 times 40 or 60% of 40, which is 24. And therefore, if we want 24 girls, well, the question said how many boys and girls. So if in this situation we've worked out that in our sample we want to choose 24 girls, and therefore we want 16 boys because 40 take away 24 gives us the 16 there. Right, just this last little section. If you've done further maths before, you might remember this function on the calculator. There is a textbook question on this in 17A. It's probably not something that you tend to get asked to do on exams or SACs, but it's just worth knowing that it exists. Your calculator's got a way of choosing numbers at random, and that can sometimes be a way of doing a random sample. The function that we use if we're going to use our CAS calculator to do it is the randlist function. It's a little bit hard to find, so I'll show you how to get to it in a second. But essentially what you do is you type in the number of values that you want to choose, then you type in your lowest and highest values. So for example, if we were trying to choose 5 random values from the numbers 1 to 80, say we've got a group of 80 people, but we just want to randomly survey 5 of them. Well, what we could do is into the main screen of the calculator, bring up your keyboard. You've got this sort of list of tabs down the side here. You actually have to scroll down and go to the catalog tab. And the function's called randlist. Now there's heaps and heaps of functions in here, so the quickest way to get to it is probably to tap these alphabet letters across until you get to R. And randlist is then this one here. You can sort of input it there. Now, like I said, the way it works, so let's go back to if we were thinking about choosing 5 values between 1 and 80. First thing you put in is how many you want to choose. So 5, comma, the lowest number, which is 1, comma, the highest number, which is 80, and you hit execute, and it should give you 5 random numbers between 1 and 80. So if you were able to allocate the numbers to people and you had 80 people, well, in your sample for this one that I've done, I'd be picking person number 33, 46, 61, 21, and 52. They'd be the 5 people that I would interview. Like I said, not going to come up heaps in methods, but it's worth knowing how to do it.